Have you ever felt like everything you've worked for your entire life could disappear in a single moment? Picture this. You wake up one morning thinking everything is fine, and by evening, your whole world has crumbled beneath your feet. This is the story of Michael Anderson, a successful businessman who lost everything he thought mattered, and it could be yours too. What happened next will change how you see God's plan for your life forever. Meet Michael Anderson, a 42-year-old man who spent 20 years building what he believed was the perfect life. He owned a thriving construction company with 15 employees, a beautiful home in the suburbs of Atlanta, and could provide everything his family needed. This is a man who prided himself on being completely self-sufficient, someone who believed that hard work and determination were the only things you needed to succeed in life. Michael had his retirement planned, his children's college funds growing, and a detailed business expansion strategy. But like many of us who think we have life figured out, he was about to discover that some things are completely beyond our control. His day started like any other Tuesday morning in October. Michael woke up early, went through his morning routine of coffee and emails, kissed his wife Sarah goodbye, hugged his children Emma and Jake, and headed to the construction site, where his crew was finishing a major commercial project that had been his company's biggest contract to date. The morning air was crisp, and as Michael drove through his neighborhood, he felt that deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've built something meaningful with your own hands. He had 3 other significant projects lined up for the next 6 months, and his company's reputation in the community was exemplary. Local newspapers had featured his business twice, calling him a model entrepreneur. As he drove to work that morning, Michael was planning a family vacation to Hawaii to celebrate his 15th wedding anniversary. He was thinking about the new truck he wanted to buy, the office building he was considering purchasing, and maybe even expanding his business to other cities. But what Michael didn't know was that his largest client, Meridian Real Estate Development Company, had been struggling financially for months. Behind closed doors, executives had been having emergency meetings, desperately trying to avoid the inevitable. The project that represented 60% of his annual revenue was about to become his worst nightmare. The phone call came at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. Michael was reviewing blueprints when his secretary Maria knocked on his door with a worried expression. "Mr. Anderson, Meridian's lawyer is on line 1, and he says it's extremely urgent." The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes changed everything. The lawyer's voice was professional but cold. Meridian Real Estate Development was filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, effective immediately. Not only would they not pay the remaining balance of $180,000 for the current project, but they were also canceling all future contracts without compensation. In that single phone call, Michael lost almost $300,000 in expected revenue. But as the shock wore off, Michael realized the nightmare was just beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, the dominoes began to fall with terrifying speed. Without that major contract providing cash flow, Michael discovered his business finances were like a house of cards. He couldn't pay his suppliers who had been extending credit based on the Meridian contract. He couldn't meet payroll for his employees, people who had families depending on their income. The bank was demanding immediate payment on the equipment loan he had taken specifically for the Meridian project. His other clients, hearing rumors about the situation, started getting nervous about his company's financial stability. 3 weeks after that devastating phone call, Michael sat alone in his empty office, staring at bankruptcy papers his lawyer had prepared. The walls that had once displayed awards and photos of completed projects now seemed to mock him with memories of better times. He had been forced to let go of 12 employees, men and women who had worked with him for years, people he considered family. The conversation with each employee had been excruciating, watching grown men fight back tears as he explained he could no longer afford to keep them employed. His equipment was being repossessed piece by piece. The trucks with his company logo, the specialized tools he had invested in over the years, all of it disappearing before his eyes. The bank was threatening to foreclose on his family home, which he had used as collateral for business loans. That night, while his wife Sarah and their 2 children slept peacefully upstairs, Michael sat in his living room in complete darkness. The house was quiet except for the old grandfather clock on the mantel, each tick seeming to count down toward an uncertain future. For the first time in his adult life, Michael felt completely powerless, completely out of control. He had always believed that if you worked hard enough, made smart decisions, and planned carefully, you could control your destiny and protect the people you loved. But now, sitting in the darkness of his own home, he realized how little control he actually had. The awards on his walls meant nothing when there was no business left to run. The beautiful home meant nothing if he couldn't make the payments. All the careful planning meant nothing when external forces could sweep everything away. Tears he had held back for weeks finally came in waves of grief and shame. How would he tell his 10-year-old daughter Emma that they might have to move, that she might have to change schools? How could he face his wife Sarah, who had trusted him completely to provide for their family? The shame was overwhelming. He felt like he had failed everyone who depended on him, everyone who had believed in him. For the first time in years, Michael found himself questioning everything he believed about life, success, and even God. He whispered into the silence, "God, if you're really there, if you really care about what happens to people like me, I need to know that this isn't the end. I need to know that there's still hope when everything looks completely impossible. I need to know that my family is going to be okay, even if I don't know how." But just when everything seemed lost, when Michael felt like he was drowning with no lifeline in sight, something extraordinary happened. The next morning, as he sat on his front porch with a cup of coffee, trying to summon courage to face another day, his neighbor, Robert Williams, appeared at his gate. Robert was an elderly man in his 70s, whom Michael barely knew beyond occasional waves over the fence. They had lived next to each other for 8 years, but their busy lives had never really intersected. Robert had heard about Michael's situation through the community, and he came not with money or business advice, but with something much more valuable. Robert asked if he could sit on the porch steps, and for the next hour, this quiet man began sharing his own story of losing everything during the economic recession 15 years earlier. He had owned a manufacturing business that employed 35 people and had been in his family for 2 generations. When the recession hit, he lost everything in months. His business, house, retirement savings, and the stress had cost him his marriage of 28 years. As Robert spoke about his journey through devastating loss, Michael realized he wasn't alone in this experience. But what struck him most was the deep, unshakable peace Robert seemed to carry, even when talking about his darkest moments. There was something in Robert's eyes that spoke of a man who had found solid ground after losing everything he thought mattered. Robert didn't minimize Michael's pain or offer quick fixes. Instead, he acknowledged the reality of the loss and the difficulty ahead. But he also spoke about discovering something during his crisis that had changed his entire perspective on what real security meant. In that moment of genuine connection, something shifted in Michael's heart. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel completely alone. As if the universe had heard his desperate plea from the night before, Robert's presence reminded him that survival wasn't just about financial resources. It was about something deeper, something he had forgotten in his years of focusing solely on material success. And then Robert shared these words that would change Michael's perspective forever. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn, leather-bound Bible, its pages marked with years of reading and reflection. He opened to a passage he obviously knew well. He read from Psalm 29, verse 11. "The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. At that moment, this eternal truth made sense to Michael like never before. These weren't just ancient words written thousands of years ago. They were a living promise that spoke directly to his current situation. As Robert read those words aloud with quiet conviction, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks, a deep, unexplainable peace that settled over his anxious heart like a warm blanket. Do you see what happened in this life-changing moment? This story teaches us that strength doesn't always come in the form we expect. Michael had spent 20 years believing that strength meant financial security, business success, and the ability to solve every problem with his own resources. But this verse revealed a completely different kind of strength altogether. Just like Michael, many of us confuse our circumstances with our identity. We think that when our external world falls apart, we fall apart too. We believe we are only as strong as our bank account, only as valuable as our job title, only as secure as our material possessions. But this verse isn't talking about strength that comes from our financial resources, professional achievements, or even our own abilities. It's talking about strength that comes from knowing we're not facing life's challenges alone, that there's a source of supernatural power available to us that transcends our circumstances. The Lord gives strength to his people. Notice what this verse doesn't say. It doesn't say, the Lord prevents all problems for his people, or the Lord guarantees his people will always be financially secure. It says he gives strength. This means that in the middle of our trials, in the center of our storms, there's a source of power available to us that doesn't depend on our circumstances changing. In our daily lives, this means that when the phone call comes with bad news, when the doctor gives a difficult diagnosis, when relationships fail, or when dreams crumble, we have access to something greater than our own limited resources. The peace mentioned in this verse isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of God's strength in the middle of those problems. When you feel overwhelmed by circumstances beyond your control, remember that this same God who gave strength to David when he faced giants, who gave strength to the Israelites when they were enslaved in Egypt, is the same God who wants to give you strength today. Michael learned that losing everything external doesn't mean losing everything that truly matters. Sometimes God allows us to lose what we thought was important so we can discover what actually is important. True security doesn't come from what we can build with our hands, but from knowing we're held by hands much stronger than our own. The peace this verse promises isn't dependent on having everything figured out. It's the supernatural calm that comes from knowing your ultimate security doesn't rest in what you can see or control, but in the unchanging character of a God who loves you unconditionally. Just like Michael Anderson, you too can find peace in the middle of your storm. His construction business eventually recovered and grew stronger than before, not because he figured out some perfect strategy, but because he learned to operate from a place of peace rather than panic, trusting that his ultimate strength came from something greater than his own abilities. Next time you face a situation that feels impossible, when you feel like everything you've worked for is falling apart, remember this story and these powerful words from Psalm 29:11. The same God who gave Michael strength in his darkest hour is ready to give you strength in yours. And you? Have you experienced this kind of peace that passes understanding in your own difficult circumstances? Have you discovered that real strength comes not from what you can control, but from trusting the one who controls everything? May these words stay with you until we meet again, reminding you that true security is found not in what your hands can build, but in whose hands are holding you through every storm of life.